Hello, everybody. This is Mara, AI Program Coordinator at WeLocalize. Welcome to our presentation. In the first part of the presentation, I will talk about machine translation. And then in the second part of the training, my teammate Alex, Senior Manager NLP Deployment, will talk about some of our AI capabilities that we think might be interesting for you. Right, so let's start with machine translation. If you are not using machine translation yet in your localization workflow, then this information is very relevant for you because machine translation will offer you benefits from speed, quality, return on investment, and security and confidentiality point of view. Productivity can be enhanced with machine translation without compromising the quality. For example, on average, on life sciences content, we have seen a 25% time reduction for certified translation. If you want a more detailed example, I could tell you that to translate a CTD Module 2 of around 200,000 words, the turnaround time can be reduced from approximately 99 days to 52 days. And then for extreme needs for speed, keep in mind that we can also offer optimized machine translation for raw publishing, and this would be instantaneous translation. Quality is not affected. We can customize neural machine translation engine for terminology accuracy and style consistency. So for example, for your patient-facing document, you will still have this simple terminology. And on the other hand, for pharmacovigilance content, you will have the correct terminology, for example. We also have a ISO 18587 compliant machine translation integrated workflow that we will see in the next slide. Also, we will help you selecting the right quality level that you need for your purpose. And of course, we will have quality assurance methods in place. The return on investment is always guaranteed. We always ensure that the savings from a machine translation setup will exceed any investment required. The pricing that we offer is always analysis-based and therefore innovative. We always perform regularly analysis, and we would report the results of the analysis to you. Also, last but not least, security and confidentiality is always respected. And we would use secure HTTPS for API calls, and data translation can be restricted to specific geographic areas. Also, it is very important that you know that source and the translation is never retained by any machine translation providers. So your super new drug will be safe from the competitors.
Mara, this is Alex. If I can jump in, you mentioned return on investment. Can you talk a little bit more about that? As a client, how can I be assured that I get return on my investment, and how long does that take?
Well, of course, it depends on the amount of new words that are processed with machine translation. Of course, the higher the amount of machine translation words, the higher the return on investment, and the quicker is the return on investment. So, of course, if we have a very big project with a lot of new words that we can process with machine translation, the return on investment is basically immediate because you would have a saving compared to human machine translation on these new words that are processed with machine translation. But as I said, it really depends on the volume of new words processed with machine translation. Cool. So as I said, we have an ISO 18587 compliant machine translation integrated workflow. You can see it in this slide. So first, we would choose the right linguist for you as per our supplier recruitment and selection procedure. Then we will have a kickoff call with the linguist to provide them the instructions they need and also answer any questions they might have. The source file is then sent to a pre-editing step in which we fix anything that could affect the results of the machine translation engine, like, for example, spelling mistakes in the source. Then machine translation is injected in the translation management system. Of course, if the client has a translation memory, then the translation memory is leveraged, usually for matches equal and above 75%, but this threshold can also be adjusted. Then post-editing is performed. We offer 3 levels of post-editing that we localize: light, medium, and full. And keep in mind that full post-editing is the only level for which we can actually issue the translation certificate. This is because on full machine translation post-editing, we have 2 linguists involved, the post-editor and the reviewer or copy editor. And the review is actually the copy editing step here. And then before delivery, we would always run our mandatory quality assurance checks. Cool. Then in this slide, we can see all the machine translation post-editing quality levels that we offer if we localize. In the top row, you see the top quality level, full post-editing. And as I said, this is actually the certified translation I was talking about. In this level, there are 2 people involved, the post-editor and the reviewer. Then we can also offer other quality levels, medium and light post-editing. In these processes here, there is just 1 person involved, the copy editor. And medium post-editing would aim at delivering a translation that conveys a technically accurate message. And then for light post-editing, we would aim at conveying an accurate message compared to the source. So we would not pay much attention to style and terminology, maybe, as we would do for medium and full post-editing. Keep in mind that we can also offer raw machine translation. This is instantaneous translation, and there is machine translation only in this step, no post-editing involved. Okay, so at WeLocalize, we use combination of automated machine translation metrics and human evaluation methodologies to recommend the most suitable engine for every request and also forecast performance. In this example, you can see that we were evaluating the performance of different engines from English into Portuguese. What we did is analyze the results of these engines with our internal auto-scoring tool, and this is just a small part of the output of our tool. Our tool outputs a series of well-known metrics in the translation industry. Here we are just showing 3 of them. And we would always consider these results in designing the post-editing program and forecasting the performance of the engines. These are our top 20 machine translation programs. As you can see, the amount of machine translation work is more than half of the whole translation work. And as you can see, for many clients, the work with machine translation is actually the greater part of the whole translation work. Okay, so this is the end of the machine translation part. Now I will leave the word to my teammate, Alex.
Mara, one last question for you. There are obviously, we create engines for different language pairs. Can you briefly talk about what language pairs are more difficult and which language pairs are least difficult, and maybe in broad terms?
Yeah, so we kind of identified 3 different language groups. We would call them low complexity group, high complexity group, and medium complexity group. The complexity for the machine translation engines normally depends on the morphological complexity of the target language and the source language. So, for example, we could say that Romance languages normally typically fall into the low complexity group, while in the higher complexity group, we would see maybe Asian languages, for example, which are, of course, morphologically more complex.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
So in my section, I'm going to talk about innovations that we have and tools that we use related to artificial intelligence, AI. And I'll be talking about three different topics: AI for quality management, AI for social listening, and AI enablement. So the idea is that I think in general, we've reached an inflection point as a society, not only for localization, where AI is being used pervasively and being used very successfully to create models and then basically make predictions that allow us to make things far more scalable and far more efficient. So let's talk about AI for quality management first and what this does. So how does this fit into your content lifecycle and translating files? So imagine you have the source. The first thing that we can do is we can decide whether the source is suitable or not based on a variety of factors that I'll be covering shortly. This is the first decision point because it allows us to decide, do we go forward with the localization project and translate these files, or conversely, do we push this content back to the technical writers for further rewrite? Once we get the source, of course, as Mara mentioned, depending on the quality levels, we would produce a target. Once we're done with the target, again, before sending this off to Linguistic Quality Assurance, LQA, we can decide on the suitability of the target. And if there are issues, push this back to the translators, editors, and proofreaders, right? So this informs basically an AI-driven linguistic quality assurance process. And if we can go to the next slide, right? So the idea here, what I just showed diagrammatically, and we'll talk about kind of the granular details of all of this. We're going to look at the source. We're going to decide whether it's suitable or not. We'll make decisions based on the source. If we send the source over and begin our localization project to translate files, what's nice is we can immediately predict at-risk content, both on a file level as well as particular sentences within files. And we can disseminate that information to everyone on the production team, from project managers to linguists, proofreaders, editors, and the LQA team. So ultimately, what that allows us to do is to have a targeted, smart LQA. So what are we doing here? What's our problem statement, right? We're trying to address operational gaps in the global journey. And we want to evaluate these inputs and outputs in a scalable, consistent, and effective fashion. And that's what AI allows us to do. Most importantly, it allows us to predict our decision-making, right? So what we would do is we would route, depending on the suitability of the source, we would route the content to the most efficient workflow and ultimately employ smart targeted LQA. So here's a possible localization workflow. So we have a source. We use an API to determine what the class of the source is, how suitable or not. We may then push this back, as I said, to the technical writer to ask them to reauthor the source up to a certain critical threshold, right? So imagine a situation where you need very simple language for patient-facing content, right? Summaries of clinical trials, results for lay people, right? It has to be written in a very simple way, and we have a certain threshold that we need to meet before we go off and start the project. Now, let's say we start the project, then we go to step 3, where again, we use the same API to now analyze the target and determine its quality after translation. Then in step 4, we can decide whether to send to LQA for these data-driven checks. So things like forbidden terms, gender-specific content, acronyms. And finally, we would of course deliver the target, the final translation files, and use metrics after we delivered for subsequent machine translation engine retraining and optimization. So here's an example of targeted LQA and the sort of effects and the business outcomes that we see it have. So in the screenshot, you can see similarity and dissimilarity between sentences, right? That's one of the features we look at. If there are lots of dissimilar sentences, right, we can see, we can immediately say, they don't match the expected source that we have. Maybe those are the ones that we need to focus on. So we can also focus on things like many nouns together, or very, very long sentences, or sentences with complicated words. So all of these salient features ultimately translate to a business outcome. And the business outcomes that we've seen are initial time savings between 15-20% per project, and even more as the program matures. Very important, the fact that the LQA pass rate improves by about 20%. And lastly, the LQA spend is reduced by about 10% per project. Okay, so let's talk about AI for social listening or sentiment analysis. So what's the use case here? Obviously, since the middle of March, we've been living in a pandemic, right? All throughout the world. And basically, what social listening, sentiment analysis allows us to do is, frankly, to save lives, right? So the idea here is we can look at a particular company, we can look at your competitors, and we can say what people are saying about your products, right? We can look whether it's positive, whether it's negative, whether it's actually helping people to the degree that it says it does, right? So we can, if we have a new drug that comes to market, we can evaluate the public perception of that drug. What are people saying about this drug on social media channels, right? We could look at industry insights. We could analyze discussions or hashtags related to a specific industry, let's say medical instrumentation, right? We could also look at competitive analysis and look at your product relative to other competing brands or products and what people are saying about them and how effective they are versus how effective you are. And lastly, if we have a public campaign or an event because we're rolling out a new drug, we can see how people are responding to that. So in this next slide, we actually have an example we wanted to show you relating specifically to life sciences. So we basically took social media posts in French and Spanish, looked at Facebook and Twitter over a 2-week period. We did some normalization. Here's an example where you see U as an individual letter, B and 4, and we transform that to actually normalize it to content such as YOU and before to get better translations. And you see a word cloud here that gives an example of how people are thinking about these products and what they're saying about them, right? So basically the business insights here are an analysis of phrases, geographic regions, products for an actionable and data-driven business strategy.
Alex, can I ask something here?
Yes, please.
How did you make the word cloud? How does it work?
Yeah, so this word cloud is a very nice example of what we can do using machine learning algorithms. So what we did here is there's a technology called TF-IDF, term frequency, inverse document frequency. It's used for search. So we use that coupled with part of speech tagging to ultimately find salient words here. And the way this word cloud is built is the words that are in a bigger font, the ones that you see more clearly, are related to the number of occurrences that a particular user said about this drug, right? So you can see things like pain, like pelvic, like side effects. Those are far more prominent, whereas things, let's say, like cramping or allergy or dizziness are less prominent.
Okay, that's cool. Thanks.
Great. So in the next section, what I want to talk about is called AI enablement, right? So the idea here is that we simply don't have enough human assistance to answer queries for an enterprise, right? If you imagine people dealing with customer support, we simply don't have enough people to field to answer all of the requests and all of the questions that are coming in. So you see a very significant move to starting to use chatbots and virtual assistants for these sorts of Q&A, and ultimately you can answer a certain number of questions and make the enterprise more efficient. And only for the questions that can't be answered with a chatbot or virtual assistant would the question or the ticket be upgraded to a human being, right? So it allows us to work in a more scalable fashion. Now, what we're talking about here is that the same data that you would use for translation, as Mara said, when we were doing machine translation, post-editing and training engines, and ultimately doing translation and engaging in the quality management process I spoke of, these same files, when they're completed, can be used to train chatbots and virtual assistants. Now, what's very important here is this idea of sociolinguistics, which is at the core of a flawless customer experience, right? So the expectation from us as human beings is when we're talking to a virtual assistant or chatbot, the conversation needs to be as human-like and as personalized, as customized as possible. Now, the way to accomplish that is by using natural language data to generate and train high-performing machine learning models and natural language processing models, right? And this is something that's used certainly in life sciences as well as other sectors like healthcare, banking, etc. So what is it that exactly we do to power this conversational UI, right? The first thing is to understand what is the use case of the client. Is it a chatbot? Is it search engines? Is it data harvesting? Right? We also need to curate the data, understand what does your data contain? What's the subject matter? What's the domain and subdomain? What are the demographics, right? Ultimately, we want to understand what will the deliverable look like? What are the conventions that are being used, the lexicons, the syntax variation? What sort of volume will we expect? Lastly is testing. How will we know, is this data good, right? What is the acceptance criteria? What is the cadence for building these models and retraining them? And what supplemental data is required? Thank you very much for joining us for this presentation.
Thank you. Bye.